We're joined now by author Steve Karras, whose new book is The Enemy I Knew, German Jews in the Allied Military and World War Parallel Lines. I mean, two. Welcome to the show, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. I'd prefer to talk about Hitler's testicles.
Well, listen, that's a whole... We have a potpourri. Every Friday we have a regular segment where Christian plays his favorite Beatles songs, and then we go into a whole Hitler Ball segment. But that's later in the week. Now, listen, a frequent question, and this might be, I don't know if this is improper of me, but a frequent question since World War II by some naysayers and some people who I think don't understand when you're getting rolled like the Jews were at that point. But you do hear people, skeptics, say, why didn't the Jews fight back? And I often shake my head and go, you're with your kid on a train, for God's sakes. They've got a gun to your head. They take you to camp. There are two lines. Where's the fight back position? At that point, you're just sort of playing it out to see where the line goes. And the next thing you know, you cannot even believe the atrocity. You know what I mean? It's almost like I would almost have been intellectually incapable as a Jew of realizing what was happening until the moment it's too late. And what your stories, and this is an extension of the documentary About Face that you did a few years ago, talk about the German-born Jews who not only fought back but played key roles in defeating the Nazis.
Well, there was, without question, a Jewish involvement in the Allied armed forces in World War II. There was over 500,000 American Jews that fought. And I had originally heard this story when I was 14 years old. I went to a summer camp, and my counselor had told me that he had a father whose name was Siegfried Dingfelder and changed his name to Fred Fields. He was from a town called Ulfeld, and he had escaped in 1938 after Kristallnacht and came to the U.S., and a few short years later was in uniform, in American uniform, became a citizen, and returned to his hometown after the armistice as a conquering soldier. And that story stuck in my head.
Wow.
It was exotic. I mean,
Hail the conquering hero.
Yeah, and I've often thought the same thing about being on a train. And then you start to read more about the Holocaust, and you realize that these people weren't fed, they weren't aided materially, with any kind of training or weaponry or anything. So that's why fights in the Warsaw Ghetto or the partisans in the forest were against all odds.
They had been killed before they were dead.
Yeah, exactly. So these are demoralized people that you're dealing with. The folks that I had talked to over a 10-year period were the lucky ones. They got out. They came to the U.S. They tried to enlist, but they were enemy aliens. Forget the fact that they were thrown out of Germany and thrown out with nothing. They came here, and their immigration status was that of an enemy alien. In Great Britain, they were friendly enemy aliens because they were from Austria and Germany. So
that's the official assignation that they were given. Wow.
Right. But like anyone else, once the war started in the U.S. and in Great Britain, they could be drafted. So like anybody else, everybody had a personal fight in World War II. Everybody had a reason to go. I thought that it would be very interesting to focus on people who were going to war against Germany, but who had actually lived in Germany, and people who knew the true consequences of losing that war.
Mm-hmm. We're talking to author Steve Karras. The book is The Enemy I Knew, German Jews in the Allied Military in World War II. Just to get off subject for one quick second, when I saw Inglourious Basterds, I found it so cathartic that the Jewish soldiers got to just... I don't know. If I was a Jewish person, that would have been so cathartic to me to finally see Hitler's head blown off. And I would imagine that once you did get to America, once you did get through processing, once you were called an enemy, what was the phrase again? But you got to the point where you thought, God, this guy has upturned my life. I hate him so much. When they got in, eventually, they must have been the most determined of all soldiers, right?
I actually went and saw that at the Directors Guild with the widow of Samuel Fuller, who was
the big red one.
Yeah, and he was Jewish and just a real blood and guts kind of guy, and so it was that much more thrilling because I know Tarantino's a big Fuller fan.
Yeah, huge one. And but the America or the Jewish soldiers in the American troops. How did you go about learning their stories? I guess you went to the first-person narrative form, right?
The first-person narrative form, these come from personal memoirs, interviews that I conducted all around the country.
How many survivors are there? Are there any?
Well,
I mean, it's all their children, right? Or their...
No, I'm still being contacted by them. It's unbelievable. Of the 300,000
or more that got out of Germany, and then 180,000 that got out of Austria. Almost 20,000 of these particular veterans served. And I'm still very much in contact with all of them.
That's amazing. I thought it was such a niche group. I thought you might have found a core group of
No, it's bizarre. The story, I was in the YMCA in Chicago a few years ago, and I was talking to a man who had the same kind of accent. It's not just German, but it's a German Jewish accent. He sounded like anybody else. He sounded like Kissinger, who I'll talk about in a second.
Yes.
And he said, I asked him where he's from. He said, "Where are you getting at?" What are you getting at? And I said, well, I'm in the process of making this documentary, and I've interviewed a bunch of people, and you're probably familiar with some of them. And I started rattling off names, and I said, Otto Stern. And he said, the guy turned white in front of me, and he said, Otto Stern, we were in the same ASTP program at the University of Kansas, and Otto, when he got to Belgium, found my parents that were in hiding. Wow. Unbelievable stuff.
That is one of the goosebumpiest 2 degrees of separation that I've ever heard in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's
a story that starts in the heartland, and this man ends up liberating them, no doubt, from a locked closet somewhere in the middle of hell on earth.
Well, there's another story. The last chapter in the book is a gentleman named Manfred Gans, who lives in New Jersey now, and he was part of an elite commando unit called 3 Troop 10 Commando, and they were set up by Louis Mountbatten and Winston Churchill to add to the roster of 10 Inter-Allied Commando. They wanted a troop entirely comprised of German speakers, people from Austria and Hungary and Germany. And Manfred drove, I think on May 7th or May 6th, he drove 150 miles through unoccupied Germany, past divisions armed to the teeth, men that had not surrendered yet because they were afraid of surrendering to the Russians. And they saw this lone British officer and his driver, and they were saying, "Please let me surrender to you. We don't want to surrender to the Russians. They'll rape and kill us."
Yeah, they knew that.
And Manfred said, "Well, what do you think you did in the Ukraine and in Poland?" And Manfred made it to the Theresienstadt concentration camp and liberated his parents.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable.
It's an amazing story. You want to hear about Kissinger?
I do, but I want to take a break because that just took my breath away. He gets to the prison camp. Unbeknownst to him, his parents are there.
He had heard that they were part of one of those deals that Eichmann was trading Jews for trucks towards the end of the war, and they found out through one of their contacts with the Dutch underground. It's a complicated story. Manfred actually just wrote a book called Life Gave Me a Chance, and people should
say, is that the most amazing moment in the history of humankind? You open up a prison camp and your parents run into your arms? Unbelievable. Well, we are talking to author Steve Karras. The book is The Enemy I Knew. It is an extension of his documentary About Face that he did a few years ago. The Enemy I Knew, German Jews in the Allied Military in World War II. A surprising glimpse, a side of Henry Kissinger you might not be familiar with. Right after this on The Dennis Miller Show. Wild Blue Yonder, later Sinatra-sized into Come Fly With Me. The United States Air Force theme. I was at the Air Force Academy not long ago doing a gig. Now that is the prettiest campus on the planet Earth right there. Veterans Day Bumper Music Wednesday. Still with us, author Steve Karras, whose new book is The Enemy I Knew, German Jews in the Allied Military in World War II. If you have a query about that or anything historically speaking about World War II, we'll do our best to answer it at 866-99-DENNIS, 866-99-DENNIS. Before we get to Hank Kissinger, any of these German Jews have mixed emotions about going to war? It wasn't their home. It obviously had been infiltrated by aliens, but did they have any qualms about going to war with their homeland? They're so strong on that homeland thing over there.
I couldn't imagine any love loss of these refugees who were lucky enough to get out.
But you know, Germans are with the motherland. They're whack for it. But obviously they realized it had been co-opted by a monster.
Right. But and you could imagine the parents of these young men and women who had known a different Germany, who had served in the First World War for the Kaiser and were very pro-German. So I think that they knew more about the gray areas of day-to-day life in Germany, unlike their kids who were immediately picked on at school, who were kicked out of school, who were defined by their race and had to be subject to all this propaganda and beatings and then
probably a gack historically when you look back, leaving the Germans that bereft after World War I. Not saying they didn't deserve to be thwacked, but I don't know. It sets the stage for Hitler. The Marshall Plan obviously comes out of that, because once you destroy somebody to that extent, you got to throw them some bone, because hungry people are going to uprise again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't know if there's any moral ambiguity. For some, there might be. I think that I've heard some really amazing stories of a family being friends with one of the Gauleiters because the parents, which was the Nazi governor of that area, and the parents had been friends with the families, or an SS officer served in the First World War with one of the Jewish adults. So I mean, there's all kinds of weird gray stories,
commingling
like
and stuff. Right?
Yeah,
and it's all intertwined. Have you ever heard the story that Hitler's great-grandfather was named Alois Schicklgruber, and to inherit some money in a small town, he had to go back and establish residency there for a few months, I believe, and change his name to the name of the relative who had given the money. Was some modest sum, but back then it was everything to them, and changed his name to Hitler. And the author of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, William Shire, advances the theory that had that inheritance never taken place and the name change, that it would have been hard for Hitler to rise up the ranks, because nobody was going to stand in the streets and say Heil Schicklgruber, because it was almost like an Emmett Kelly name back then. So kind of an interesting historical sidebar. Another one I'm fascinated by, because I've not heard him speak about it, but did you talk to Henry Kissinger about his service?
Oh, yeah. I interviewed him in, I think, February of 2001, and it was the same week where Christopher Hitchens' book came out, accusing him of war crimes. And I couldn't believe, or now I could believe, that he just wanted to talk to somebody who wasn't there to give him a hard time, or the way he said, thank you for not giving me a hard time. And he
good kiss. Yeah. You're dining out on that Kissinger impression.
Yeah, no, I've got another one. He looks in the door while we're setting up all of the camera equipment, and he said, I'll give you 20 minutes. And I said, well, I heard we were going to get 40. He says, well, you can negotiate the other 20.
That's Kissinger humor right there.
But he said, it was the most important experience of his life. He served in an infantry division, the 84th Division, the Rail Splitters, an outfit out of northern Illinois. And he says, he was so overwhelmed by how accepted he was. He said, so much so that I thought that I had lost my accent.
Wow, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, and he went to Europe with the division, and after 3 weeks of being in a rifle company in combat, attached to the 30th Division for combat practice, as he called it, he was on latrine duty and explained a map translated a map for an officer, and he said, what are you doing in a rifle company? And so that began this love affair with military government and counterintelligence. And by the war's end in Krefeld in 1945, he's probably 22 years old, and he's living in a huge villa with a beautiful blonde girlfriend.
He always dug his chicks.
Yeah, with a blonde, but the girlfriend of a fallen SS soldier.
The ultimate revenge.
Yeah, and his friend Jerry Beckhofer, who is in my book, who was from the town of Fürth, and they lived in Washington Heights. Went to high school together. He wrote in his diary, he said, ran into Heinz Kissinger in Krefeld. What a spread.
That's one of the funniest things
That's
I've
a Twitter. It's a Twitter from 1945.
Oh, that is unbelievable. Before it was ever there, Sal. You're right. The first and the hippest Twitter. Stevie, that's a beautiful outline there, man. Give me that again. What is it? Ran into Heinz Kissinger.
What a spread. It goes on.
Oh, that is hysterical, my friend. And historic. I'm going to give this a tumble. The Enemy I Knew, German Jews and the Allied Military in World War II. The author, Stevie Karras. This looks like a Christmas gift for me. I'm going to request it off the missus. And, Steve, we'll talk at you down the road. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.